Do I get a copy of the slides, Philip?
Only if you ask nicely. Yes. Shall I say that 3 times before somebody says, can I have a copy of the slides? And welcome, audience members, because you will get a copy of the slides, because there is an awful lot of information that we want to impart with you over the next 59 minutes and 45 seconds. I'll stop it.
Someone's going to ask for the slides. Philip, I bet you fear. Someone says, can I have a copy of the slides?
I want to start off this webinar by asking everybody, did you know to smash a Y for yes or an N for no, whether you knew it was Cyber Awareness Month? October is Cyber Awareness Month, or Cyber Security Awareness Month, to give it its full title. I'm just curious to know whether you knew that.
No's have it at the moment, I think.
I'm in the wrong webinar. I thought you were doing Consumer Duty. Yeah. Okay, right. Okay, that's really interesting. We won't start ranting on that, but I thought it was curious. I mean, we did this webinar. We put together this webinar unknowing that, and realized in our research that it was Cyber Security Awareness Month. And so well done, and hats off, Blue Peter badges to all those individuals who do know that is Cyber Awareness or Cyber Security Awareness Month. Anyway, no matter, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, People, Not Passwords, Embedding Behavioral Resilience in Cyber Defense. That is a mouthful, but we are going to walk and talk you through how that progresses in practice. I'm Philip Allen, and I'll be your host for the next hour as we explore how firms in Cyber Security Awareness Month can build stronger, more resilient people, not just stronger passwords. And great to have two fantastic voices to unpack that with us. Adrian Harvey, co-founder and chairman of Elephants Don't Forget, who spent years helping organizations, yes, years helping organizations hardwire learning and compliance into everyday behavior. And welcome, Maria. Maria Simeon, partner at Pathlight Associates, advising boards and leaders on culture, conduct, and the psychology of risk. And today we're going to look at beneath the surface of cyber resilience, what it actually takes to drive vigilance, and how culture and leadership and everyday habits can shape your firm's approach to effective cyber resilience. But before we get started, as ever, guess what? You get a copy of the slides and a recording. If you didn't know, you can sign up to our latest updates from ourselves, as well as from Pathlight Associates as well. Okay, we're not going to get through the next 57 minutes, are we? Without an emoji. And you get to post your questions and answer your own questions if you really wanted to in the Q&A, which is denoted by the 2 speech bubbles at the top of your toolbar there. We'll also run some live polls, live polls that you can actually engage with as well. So please take part, because that shapes the conversation. And yes, once again, yes, we will give you the slides on this. So we'll look at 5 key themes. We want to know why, and you probably want to know why, that no one is immune to phishing or social engineering attacks. And what can we learn from that? And thankfully, we've got people like Maria to help us to enhance our understanding of that. We'll talk about, why cyber is not IT's problem. If you're in IT or InfoSec, we understand you, feel your pain on this one. We want to reason and understand why culture, not technology, is the strongest line of defense against cyber threats. And we ask ourselves, current and future regulation and why that may be forcing firms to take cyber security even more seriously. And finally, because every day is a school day in a Elephants Don't Forget webinar, we want to introduce you to what we call schemas. I did not know what that meant, but Maria's going to unpack that for us and there as a way that every employee can basically recognize, interpret, and respond to new and expected cyber threats. At the end of this webinar, when we finally get there, and yes, the slides will be available, we will actually make sure that you can understand how to embed cybersecurity and cyber resilience into your culture. Phew, what an introduction that was there. So let's kickstart the webinar off, and actually with our first poll question there, let's go for it there. Okay, how confident are you that your people would spot and report a phishing attempt today? So how confident, as is, and please note that your results will not be shared nor disclosed to any of us as panelists, as well as anybody else. So this is completely confidential. So how confident are you that your people would spot and report a phishing attempt today? Whilst people are populating that, Maria, let me come to you and ask you this. How do you create that psychological safety within a firm so employers aren't afraid of admitting that they nearly fell for something?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a few elements that constitute psychological safety: trust, respect, support. I'd say the most important is seeing failure as a learning opportunity and not something to punish or humiliate people with. So actually, if someone reports a near miss, that's a good thing, and it demonstrates vigilance rather than a failure.
Completely agree. That ability to learn from your mistakes, that is a fundamental. And I think modern life, we try to shelter people from that to some extent, about not actually learning from your mistakes. So mistakes are perfectly acceptable, safe mistakes, perfectly acceptable to make.
Yeah, and that's not to say there shouldn't be consequences, but it's about making the consequences appropriate and actually making even the consequences learning opportunities versus punishment.
Well, when in a past life, when we were running dangerous operations in different environments, we would look at near misses as a marker for how well that business was operating. Because if they weren't having any near misses, they weren't managing the problem.
Yeah.
Do you think that, Adrian, that many firms have overestimated, therefore, how cyber ready their people actually are? I mean, you look at those poll results, they're very confident, 30%.
So was Custer. Just saying. Yeah. Can't help myself, really. But yes, I do think that. And we were talking, we were talking earlier, we were looking at the phishing attempts that come across my screen and it says, click here and get a voucher for a new laptop and all these sorts of things, get a free Pizza Express or whatever. So we laugh at them because they are laughable. They're so bad. But does that then not condition us? And we get them all right. Yeah, click, click, click. Does that not just condition us that the cyber criminals are stupid and they're just useless? And then, of course, a really credible one comes along and we click it.
13%, Maria, from this poll, are unsure or not confident about whether people in their firm would spot or report a phishing attempt today.
Yeah, I'm sort of unsurprised by that, really, because I think that there's a little bit of numbness to the whole sort of cyber risk issue, and a little bit of distancy, because if we don't quite know what to do about it, and it's not that we don't know what to do about the really obvious ones, to your point, Adrian, it's when it's something really sophisticated and we almost click it, and then okay, how do we get that into the psychology of the organization so that we don't have the sort of those near misses where something looks real? And I'm sort of unsurprised that it's quite hard to hardwire that in.
It's strange because as you say, I mean, we see the statistics and firms are slightly unsure or haven't even tested how robust their approach to phishing emails is and the responses from the people because they haven't tested it. And yet 95% of all cyber attacks in some shape or form are related to human error there. And that's quite surprising. There's a disconnect between the risk, Adrian, and the response of firms.
Yeah, I'm going to sort of out the fact that, Maria, last time we did a webinar together, I can't remember the subject matter, but we had something like 1,400 registrants for the webinar. And let's say it was on customer vulnerability, which is not an unimportant subject matter. We put the same amount of diligence and effort into this webinar, and we get 250 registrants. it could be coincidental, but it could also be, in my view, systematic or symptomatic of how firms look at this issue of cybersecurity and the perception of risk and their perception, and we're going to talk a bit more about this perception of ability to do something about it, and the perception of it's something that we can sub, to use my parlance, can I sub this to somebody else to deal with? So the human is the weakest link in the chain. And I'm not just talking in cybersecurity, I'm talking in so many things now. We live in a digital world. We used to live in a world where we had computers that help us do our work, and now we live in a computer world and we have people that work in the computer world. So, the level of computing capability, even the most simplistic firm, is huge. So people are the weakest link generally in the workplace, and I think it's so crystal clear and stark in this area of cybersecurity.
Maria, do you think that does the firm and perhaps the individual themselves saying, well, look, we've invested millions in technology, so they believe that they're covered?
I think there is the case, and because we've invested millions, we must be covered, and we've, it's that sort of, it's trying to match up the cognitive dissonance. We've invested the millions, therefore we must be okay. And actually, it's really easy to ignore the human factor because it's harder to address. It's easy to address systems. There's a fix to a system. How do I address the whole people behavior awareness issue? It's much harder. It requires a different kind of investment, not just money, but time, engagement, leadership, attention. And let's face it, leaders these days are on cognitive overload. They've got too much to deal with. So if cyber's an easy thing for me to outsource, I'll do it. And not just leaders, everyone in an organization. The technology is there, we're protected. I don't need to worry about it. It's just a natural assumption to make.
And I love this line, Adrian, firewalls don't click links, people do. That's a pretty blunt statement. Is that true?
Of course it is. Look at the data point before, 95%. I think actually 95% is low. I think the data point I saw from some other report was higher than that, if you can believe that. But firewalls, yes, people are the weakest link, and Maria makes a really good point. I run a business called British Gas. We spent a lot of money on technology. It would be unrealistic to think that most people's mindset wasn't that we had invested a shitload of money in technology. Surely that's good enough. Surely we bought the right stuff, right? We're a FTSE 30 business. We got to be buying the right stuff. We got this covered, right? The people stuff, let's get it on the table. The people stuff is the problem, not the technology. The people stuff's the problem, and it's bloody hard. And it's not a one-time fix. It's not to pay the guy or girl in IT to put some software patch in that solves the problem. This is a continual hard work effort. And we talked earlier about mindsets of cyber criminals versus corporations. And Maria reminded me that when we planned this webinar, I talked about a war footing and the fact that we were at war with cyber criminals, and all of the rhetoric in the press is about we're being attacked. And it's just like it's life. In my parlance, it's like corporations are taking a knife to a gunfight. Their mindset is in a completely different place. The cyber criminals got nothing to lose. They're at war with corporates. Corporates, they've got business to them.
Yeah. And that's despite, reinforcing the point, despite all the training that firms roll out, awareness is not sticking, is it? Because awareness fades. And it's that forgetting curve that
the old forgetting curve. Maria's going to talk a little bit about this without throwing under the bus. I'm sure you are going to talk a little bit about this from a psychological point of view in a minute. But the basic principle of forgetting, the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, you're going to forget 60% in 24 hours. And if you codify the subject matter as boring, dare I say, you forget it even quicker. You find it even harder to make those connections in the brain. Yeah, so a lot of people will codify cybersecurity as, let's say, uninteresting. And that is a big part of the problem. So if sitting a training course on cybersecurity and then going and getting back on with your work, the chances of that having a material impact on your capability on a ongoing basis is minimal, which is why 95% plus of the successful penetrations are a result of humans.
Yeah. Maria, talk to us about this thing called vigilance fatigue.
Yeah, it sort of, it links a little bit to what I alluded earlier around cognitive load. So if there are too many alerts and or too much sort of reminding of people around this issue, you can get the opposite effect of it not getting enough engagement, actually, because people get fatigued, and vigilance fatigue is a real thing. You just become a bit overwhelmed, and what you do is you tune it out. And we don't just see this in cyber, we see it in a whole load of other areas where, people are trying to get compliance in place. Financial crime is another really good example of it. That there's just so much overwhelm of people needing to pay attention to different aspects of it that people start to tune it out. And so what you need is something a bit more sustained over time, so that what you're developing is the ability to think critically about something, not just respond automatically. So you can get to automatic response if you've built it up, but if you're trying to program people to just respond without thinking it through, that's when you then get the fatigue and the lack of performance around it.
And this is where the mood music has changed, isn't it? Because it's not just criminals trying to prey on your firewalls, but it's preying on the psychology of the individual and manipulating and that. We put in this slide, Maria, that culture beats compliance every time, and that you can't patch human behavior there. What does that mean in practice?
You can't. So this reminds me of a quote that's often been attributed to a guy called Peter Drucker, which is culture eats strategy for breakfast. So it's the same thing. You can have the best compliance function in the world. You can have the best policies, the best procedures, the best technology. If your culture isn't right, isn't supporting it, isn't rewarding it, isn't recognizing it, it's going to fail. So systems, processes, etc., can be world class, but like I say, if the culture isn't there, something will go wrong at some point.
And so when we look at the background to this, and it collides with this regulatory world that we now live in, Maria, and obviously we have the new failure to prevent fraud offence, which came into action on the 1st of September of this year, and how firms think about cyber risk in that context. With one simple test, the challenge is, could you prove you did everything reasonable to prevent fraud in the first place? And then added to that, obviously got DORA, the Digital Operation Resilience Act. I'll post those references in the chat soon after. Regulators do, Maria, expect boards to develop a proactive cyber culture and not just a policy. So this is I feel that this is a pivotal moment that firms have to step it up.
Yeah, so it's moved away from just proving you've got enough in place to actually you're going to be held accountable for it. So there is a real shift in regulation towards accountability. And actually, there's also a real shift that I see from regulators, an increased focus on culture as your firewall, if you like, in cyber terms, or as your sort of ultimate line of defense in terms of fraud and financial crime. Culture is that is that firewall, and there is an increased focus from both the regulators that I work with, the FCA and the PRA, on this, and they're beginning to get more demanding around it.
We've posted a number of the references in the chat there. Adrian's smiling away, must be keyboard boring himself with a couple of individuals there. Well, I'll have a look at that and start to chuckle along with that dialogue between the two. But the last line of this slide is a powerful one, I think, Adrian. Cyber is a conduct issue, and poor awareness is not just an IT failure, and there. What does that mean day to day for leaders then, if it's a conduct issue?
So I spent a decade in corporate finance where health and safety existed, but I'm not sure I could spell it at the time. And then I joined the energy sector, and health and safety was an absolute reality. And the difference between cultures, in when you put a health and safety banner above the door versus, let's say, cyber, let's say, dare I say, financial services, financial crime, whatever, is starkly, it's quantifiably different. You can feel it when you go into the organization. You go past a building site in the UK now, you'll see things like considerate contractors. You'll see them boasting how many days they've had since the last accident. They'll use it as part of their recruitment for their staff. This is not a tick in a box. This is organizations embracing a culture of workplace safety. Now they get it wrong, they go to prison. Now a whole bunch of people say, well, there you go. You know, that's why, that's the only reason they're doing it, because if they get it wrong, they're going to prison. Possibly, maybe. I'd like to be more fair and say I think that a lot of firms have worked out that it's good business to have a culture where their employees go home every night safe, and that they've got safe operations. It's a lot less expensive than having big accidents. So if you look at the culture of health and safety in the workplace in the UK, and you look at that culture, and it's from the top, it's right the way through the organization. Everybody in the organization wears all the PPE, we've got the mindset, it's continual. It's not a tick box. And then you look at cybersecurity, in my opinion, you couldn't be further apart. So culture eats everything else for breakfast. So
it's interesting, and Maria, riffing off what Adrian has said there, it's not in the lexicon or the vocabulary, is it? Yeah, in the same way health and safety is, as described by Adrian. Why is that?
I don't think it's seen its way through. So I think this is changing a lot faster than organizations are able to keep up with. It's a little bit like, dare I bring those two letters in the conversation? It's a bit like AI. It's moving a lot more quickly than organizations are able to work with and deal with. And I think it's just taking a bit of time to hardwire it into, and I think it's hardwired into technology and processes, but it's not hardwired into people yet. And awareness isn't the same thing as behavior either. So you can be aware of it, but it doesn't mean you're going to act on it.
Well, it's sobering, isn't it? Even people who know better sometimes fall for perhaps phishing or social engineering attempts. So the question isn't, just as you said, Maria, just about knowledge, it's about behavior. Why is it that perhaps people who, quote unquote, should know better still get caught out? And, you know, how do you explain that? And then secondly, how does the idea of risk alertness actually work in practice?
Okay, so this is an interesting one, because some of us are more hardwired for risk alertness or for not being caught out than others. So for some people, it's in their psychological makeup to be a little bit more risk alert. They've got a personality trait that enables them to just question everything potentially, but when they see something, their first instinct is to question it. Now, you can't rely on that, because organizations are made up of, and should be made up of, very diverse people. So for those people for whom it's not in their psychological makeup, it takes more cognitive effort to be alert and to be vigilant. So you need to start training and developing that instinct for it in people. So even experts. So we have someone in our team who nearly got caught out. They're a financial crime specialist. They've been working in this area for years. This email came through. It looked like it was from our COO. They almost clicked it. Something about it looked wrong, and they raised it as an alert. We were like, well done, because I mean, it would have caught me out as well, because it looked so genuine. And that's partly, you know, they've been trained to think about it. So in that moment, they go critical thinking, wait a second, something about this looks off. Maybe I shouldn't click it. I wasn't expecting this email. So why have I got it? So there's a little bit of that, rather than just, oh yeah, I'll open it. Looks like it's from the COO. So it does need training if it isn't instinctive.
Yeah, and we talked about, you've made the distinction, Maria, cyber awareness does not equal cyber resilience there. And, you know, perhaps telling you to suck eggs here, Adrian, can that be taught? Can that transition from cyber awareness to cyber resilience be taught on an individual level as well as a team and a corporate level?
Yes, it can. Very interesting to hear what Maria says about this. Some people being hardwired to be more sensitive to risk. I'm learning to be a dive instructor, and part of that one of the things that I am struggling with, yeah, is my natural predisposition to risk. So I'm a natural risk taker by default, yeah, and I have to train myself, my mindset, to look for particular situations all of the time. So yes, of course it can be. Now the interesting thing is, and perhaps a lot of the audience will say, well, yeah, you get it wrong, you're going to end up dead. So you've got a really big, you've got quite a solid motivating force to training yourself to do that. Yes, and maybe. The point is you can train yourself to do it. For me, and one of the things I hope that we bring out in this webinar is how do you achieve that? How do you get there? Because you can clearly do it, and we do it every day in different ways in our own business with our customers. So yes, you can, but I always ask the question, what's in it for me with them? How do you get people across that bridge from, I'm aware to I'm actually going to take some action and put some effort in at an individual level? Because it can't just be Maria that does it. It's got to be all of us.
And you talk about, we titillated the audience at the start of this webinar with this word called schemas. Triggering the right instinct to Maria and before the wrong click. What does that mean?
So schemas are essentially a mental model, and we've all got them. We've all got schemas for doing different things. I'll just give you the easiest example to explain is as going through an airport. Now, most people who do a fair amount of travel have a schema for getting themselves from the minute they enter through the airport through to catching their flight. It involves going up to checking where the checking desk is, going up to the checking desk, giving some ID, putting a bag on, going through security, getting your laptop, your liquids out, all of that stuff. That's a schema that we build up over time that enable us to efficiently get through an airport. And if you travel a lot, you've probably noticed that schema develops quite quickly. And if you're me, you start timing yourself, door to lounge, how quickly can I do it? And then it doesn't matter whether you're going to Heathrow or JFK or Tokyo Haneda Airport, you've got a schema for getting through an airport. So you can build those mental models for pretty much any skill set and for any mindset as well. So we do a lot of work helping leaders think through how they do stakeholder management, how they do influencing, etc. You can also build it for risk assessment. And you can build it a specific one if you wanted to for cyber, which is if I'm seeing something that doesn't look right, what do I do? What's the thinking process I need to go through? Just like you do when you go through an airport.
And just to reinforce that it's not IT's problem, it's everybody's problem. We would propose that cyber defense doesn't start off with IT. It starts right in your inbox where most breaches begin. And if you thought that was, a bit outlandish and a bit exaggerating, then perhaps ask the CEO of a co-op, which is featured here on the right-hand side. And she said that April's cyber attack cost them £206 million in lost sales, and latterly admitted that 6.5 million of co-op members had their data stolen. So, if we didn't think that everybody's ownership there, and I think she makes reference to that, we've highlighted that in the text, that everybody's responsibility to this. That flies in the face of what perhaps many firms, Adrian, are doing and saying about cybersecurity, that they're not actually using that as a leverage to say, hang on a sec, this is what happened to M&S, this is what happened to Co-op. We need to raise our game in terms of our approach to training, being inclusive, and actually making sure that every individual is accountable.
Yeah, I think when I ran a big business, my mental bandwidth was overstretched all of the time. So I just didn't have the bandwidth to deal with all of the stuff that was coming at me. Even with an EA and a good team, you still get overloaded. So you're always looking at or for stuff that you can sub. Yeah, stuff that I can move off my immediate radar and put somebody else, especially stuff, as Maria said, that's not going wrong. So there's a certain element here that says, well, you know, we don't have a problem, do we? No, who's going to hack us? We're just a pharmaceutical company, right? So who's going to hack us? So I just move that to somebody else in IT, because I don't really understand it anyway, and park it over there. So it seems to me, and we were talking about why is it that cyber falls into that category, and what is it? What are the attributes? What are the characteristics of cybersecurity that make me think as an executive I can pass that on to Tarquin in IT to deal with, and I can take it off my plate, and I don't have to live and breathe this. I think it's not.
Yeah, I mean, are we? Yeah, I mean, that's a critical point? Is that an internal obstacle, perhaps, Maria, that we're inadvertently placing, is that it's a department. We've got a department, that's their job, that's their responsibility. But instead of making it part of individual performance and not just a policy, how can we break down that silo mentality that psychologically and on the org chart we're also representing? How do we break down that so we unlearn and relearn that schema that you've challenged us with?
So, I mean, there's a couple of things in what you've just asked, Philip. I think in terms of the first thing, I think somebody needs to have some kind of responsibility at a board level for the hardwiring of cyber. So what I mean by that is the technology, the processes, and the procedures. The execution of it needs to sit with everybody in an organization. Now, how do you put that into the culture? That, you know, there are lots of different ways to do that, and I know we're going to talk about some of this later in terms of tone from the top, reward recognition, etc. But at the individual level, as I said, you know, there are ways to build those mental models. I know we're going to cover some of them later on in terms of the steps that people can take to actually start paying attention to this. And it's reminded me of yet another quote, which I think was also attributed to Drucker, even though I don't think he actually said it, which is that which gets measured gets attended to. So if you start weaving in behaviors that relate to cyber into people's performance management, performance and objectives, etc., they'll start attending to it. If they know they're going to get measured for it, they'll start attending to it.
I would agree, and I can't remember who has referenced that, but it might have been Drucker.
It's a bit disputed who actually said it.
I think, yeah, no, it wasn't Porter, but yeah, it must have been Drucker. Anyway, in your firm, and this is riffing off what Maria's just said, and if you, by the way, you know where that quote is name checked from, post it in the chat, that we gratefully received. In your firm, who do your employees think owns cyber resilience? We had a slight nuance on our first question, but we course corrected as good people, as good webinar hosts as we are. There, in your firm, who do you think actually owns cyber resilience? And we've got a number of options there. Where do you hear, Adrian, it's owned in the firm, without trying to skew the audience results?
You're not going to believe.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Just got a feedback.
You have, because my charging cable has failed on my laptop, and I'm down to 6% on my thing, and I'm just trying to sign in from a different device. Couldn't make it up. Anyway, so the key point here, don't worry, we'll style through this, and the separate device will come on in just a second. Who do your employees think? So this is the key for me. I think if you were to ask the exec, they might come out with like a bit of a trite line, you know. You say go. I think employees, reading the question, I think most employees are going to say IT.
And Maria, if you look at that, the results, I've just posted the results there. IT 53%, compliance 6%, everyone 32% is part of our culture. Gosh, is that what you would say?
I think this reflects reality, actually.
Yeah.
I think this is what it currently is, and I think this is why we potentially have only 250 people on this webinar versus 1,400 that you usually get. And I, I'm sort of unsurprised, and really, I think in terms of where organisations are, it's a little bit disappointing that it's not further around everyone, but it's understandable because I don't think there's been enough focus on it coming from different quarters, but from leadership teams in particular and boards. And again, going back to that, if it gets measured, it gets attended to. Where have the regulators been with this? And so they're only just now starting to hold people to account for it. So I think we will see a shift and a change over time.
And we've come back to what the elephant in the room is your culture. We talk about it again and again, and perhaps we also need to look at other lines of responsibility there, and the accountability angle is critical there. We talk about culture being a firewall, and intentionally. What does that look like in practice? You've alluded to it already, talking about tone from the top there. Is this clearly is a board issue, a board risk issue there? Top, middle, or bottom of CEOs or C-suite's agendas?
So I think tone from the top is one of those phrases that gets bandied about, and it's very easy to assume that when we say tone from the top, what we really mean is the board or the executive, and it's just it's their issue, and they've got to sort of take responsibility, and yes, they're setting the tone, but actually the top cascades down in very different ways in organizations. So if I'm sort of a first line of defense, a customer facing person, then I'm dealing with people all the time potentially, and I've got lots of emails coming in at me, and it would be quite easy to target me. My top is not the board and it's not the CEO, it's someone who immediately manages me. So actually, we need to be aware that the whole organization needs to be brought in. Everyone who has a role as a top somewhere in an organization has to sort of walk the talk on this. So I think that tone and how do you set the tone? Well, role modeling, you've got we already allude to it here. Do I role model the behaviors? Do I talk about them? Do I reward them? Do I recognize them? Are all things that contribute to having a culture that attends to this.
And if you don't work on it, it decays, though, doesn't it?
It does. It needs attention, continuous attention, until it becomes second nature. But then, even then, you need to keep reminding people, because when it becomes second nature, you slip into unconscious incompetence again. You think you know it, you think you're aware, and then suddenly you slip up because it's a bit like driving the car. You notice your bad habits. So it has to be continuously reinforced.
We thought you got hit by the iceberg that's on the screen here, Adrian, and you're sailing in one of your boats that you sail often. But you obviously made it out of one of the only few lifeboats. Jack, is it Jack on the Titanic? I don't know. Well, anyway, so moving back onto what we're talking about, yes, cyber security culture iceberg there. I mean, we talked about, obviously, above the line, we talk about policies and procedures and execution. We talked about that quite a bit, and that's above the waterline there. But below the waterline are things like trust and values and leadership. And you'll see that the iceberg represents what the NCSS have actually said is a good and effective and robust approach to culture there. Easy to measure whether you've actually got a policy in place, tick, got procedures in place, tick. Is it possible, Adrian, to actually perhaps look at trust, values, behaviour, and start measuring those approaches and people's attitudes and responses to cyber security, to the extent that there is no excuse for firms to say we don't know because we just don't know?
Yes, of course, it's possible to measure it. How much effort are you prepared to put into it? So you can measure it in a really shit way. We can do a survey, fill it in. Yeah, look, everything's cool. Yeah, and then we get on with our work. Well, that's part of the problem, with respect. Or you can decide it's actually important, And I want to understand what this organization's culture is on an ongoing basis in relation to what is potentially the biggest threat facing my business. Now, yes, of course, we do it in other areas, and the answer is it needs to be continual. You can't dip in and dip out, dip in and dip out. It just doesn't work. It needs to be continual. It needs to be part of your psyche, and you need to continually assess your people in relation to this. You can do it in lots of subtle ways. Our technology does this. Bit of a pitch. We tend not to make this a big sales pitch, but that's one of the things that we can do. We can help you with. But specifically, you need to be engaged with your people, quantifying in a meaningful way how your employees feel about cybersecurity, how empowered they feel about it, whether or not they think they can do something about it when they think it's their problem. And then you need to work on it to change it. Because as Maria said at the beginning, it's really difficult. It's really difficult. This is not an easy problem to fix. But if you want to, it's like anything else. Put enough effort into it, you'll do it.
Is there that commitment by firms, Maria, to make it happen?
Interestingly, I think there's commitment if you've been stung.
Yeah.
And I think if you haven't,
funny that, yeah.
It's not going to happen to me. It's that optimism bias we alluded to earlier. Yeah, I know cyber's a risk. Yeah, I know it kind of happens, but it kind of happens out there. And there's a little bit of willful blindness in that. So if it's not happened to me, am I really going to spend a whole load of money, time, effort, leadership, attention, focus, etc. to build it into the culture? Possibly, probably not. Should I? Probably yes. Because actually, again, it's your first line of defense.
Does it come in the too difficult box then?
It does. It's difficult, and it's perceived as expensive. I say perceived as expensive because actually it's not. If you think about the collateral damage, if you think about the however many millions it was for the co-op, I mean, you know, putting a program in place that embedded this systemically into their culture would have been a lot cheaper than the losses they faced. And I think this is what organizations don't necessarily get. It's the potential collateral damage if they don't do it.
We've tested you and challenged you with a couple of poll questions, but we thought we'd throw this one at you, which is what most effectively drives cybersecurity or cybersecure behavior in your firm. And we've listed positive reinforcement, fear of consequences, real-world examples and storytelling, regular testing, and feedback loops. And the reason why we've done this is that we understand and recognize that culture drives awareness, but actually what drives behavior? Is it encouragement or consequences? And certainly, I mean, if you look at DORA and the failure to prevent fraud, and their DORA especially challenges firms to continuously test through tabletop exercises and scenario simulations, clear communication, obviously, and accountability, and training on awareness of all staff. So I'm curious to know, basically, where do you think that is, stick or carrot? Let's see what you say on that. So Adrian, 37% real world examples and storytelling, regular testing and feedback loops. That's good, isn't it? Going off in the right direction.
It is going off in the right direction. If I liken it to health and safety, real world storytelling, and exec and management owning the problem, walking the talk, feedback loops, continual testing and assessment, that absolutely has to be part of it. Otherwise, you don't know where your starting point is. So you need to know where you are, not in a blamey way, but you need to know where you are so that you can fix the problem. But storytelling, most of the training I see doesn't relate to me in the role that I do in my business. So I struggle to relate to it. I'm like, well, okay, it's a cartoony thing, and I hate that anyway. But that's just a personal preference. But if on the other hand you said, by the way, Dan, your co-founder, he did this yesterday, I'm like, really, I can't believe he did, because I can't believe he ever made a mistake. According to him, he never does. But you think about that in that context, and you think, wow, it's suddenly very, very personal to me. And I'm really listening now. I'm really engaged that if that could happen to him, it could definitely happen to me. So for me, it's a complex problem. I think beating people with a stick is just not the answer. It never worked in health and safety. You need to jump in the river. If you're a manager or a leader, you need to be in it, you need to live it and breathe it, and then you need to hold people to account, and you need to be seen to be talking about it. When did you last talk, as opposed to send an email, to any of your employees about cybersecurity? Talk to them. Even have a conversation where you raised it. The football and cybersecurity didn't happen. Didn't happen. I already know it. Didn't happen.
Yeah. Maria, there's power in stories, and to change culture, isn't it? It lands, doesn't it?
It does land because it's emotional. So we all delude ourselves that we think that we make rational decisions. We don't. We know that all of our decision making has an emotional basis. Plato said it 2000 years ago when he alluded to learning, that all learning has an emotional basis. He knew it back then before we had MRI scans to prove it. And now we do have MRI scans, so we can prove it. So our limbic system, which is that part of the brain that is the first response to any situation, is essentially our emotional brain, and that's where we make decisions. We then post-rationalize because we bring it forward to the prefrontal cortex, and we find ways of sort of making sense of our decisions. But fundamentally, they're emotional ones, which is why storytelling works, because it speaks to the part of the brain that is older, that is more instinctive, and it also accesses the left side of the brain, which is more imaginative and creative, versus where most of the logic happens, which is in the right part of the brain. So yes, it works for a number of reasons, and it has a lot more. I mean, I can see the words pull and push, but if you like, it's got much more of a pull approach, and it's a more positive way of getting messages across. Now, that's not to say that I don't think there should never ever be a stick. I think there should be some consequences, but again, there are ways of making consequences positive, not negative.
And in light of, and I want to get your feedback on some of the things that, a recent article that you posted around SMCR is as well, and we headed up this discussion point around how the regulation might influence decision making, especially when it comes down to cyber resilience as well. Changes, obviously, the consulting period for SMCR is closed on the 7th of October, and CP25 basically /21, if anybody wanted to know that. But do you think the proposed changes to senior managers and certificate regime changes kind of like, changes people's approach to behavior and attitudes towards responsibilities like cyber resilience? Does it change the behavior or the schema of individuals' thought process?
I think there's a risk that it might, because the overt reason for it is to make it lighter touch administratively. So to make the whole SMNCR process, the process of being certified, easier for firms to manage. Great. Don't disagree with that. I think it is quite heavy as a process. Yeah. However, there's a little bit of lightning to it in that, regulators are no longer, my words, not theirs, rubber stamping people. So, that there might be a bit more laxity around who holds an SMF, and a little bit less sort of checking around that, which implies a little bit more relaxed rules around it. And I think there's a risk that can lead to some laxity, some inattentiveness, and a little bit of a looser culture, which is not what you want if you're thinking about cyber, financial crime, or any of these things that have reputational impact and beyond, and survival impact, really. So I think there is
simplification. So simplification doesn't mean dilution, and less red tape doesn't mean less responsibility.
It shouldn't mean less responsibility. No, absolutely. There's really no excuse for bad governance.
Yeah.
Philip, can you hear me?
Yeah, we're loud and clear.
Yeah, marvelous.
Yeah, you obviously, do we have the real you, or are you been hacked, or you've been glitched out for this webinar?
Clicked on whatever link came up on my screen.
I mean, in terms of like training and approach to training and to drive that culture that we want and that we need to kind of like challenge the technology. Goodness me, how many?
I can't shut up. Sorry.
You were talking in the chat that you can't patch human behavior there, and that you talked about, Adrian, about having that behavioral resilience alongside the technical resilience there. Are firms understanding of that, and if so, are they making tracks and progress towards that sufficiently to build what you see on the right hand side is this culture that we talk about, anticipating, managing new threats?
I honestly think if you sat down with 1,000 FTSE executives and said, do you think cybersecurity is a problem for your firm? They're going to say yes. I think if you talk to them about people, the people component, and they were honest and it was Chatham House, yeah, they would probably accept and admit that they're failing to bring the workforce along with them. Yeah, if at all, yeah, that they are essentially going out there and doing anything about it in an overt way. My previous point, talking about the football, talking about cybersecurity, I think it beggars belief to think that highly paid, intelligent executives look at the problem and say, yeah, we got all that sorted, all our people are bloody experts. It's completely opposite. They recognise it. And I think some of the chat and comments that I've seen just on this webinar, it is very difficult. But just because it's difficult doesn't mean we don't do it, right? So as managers and leaders, our job is to do the difficult shit, not just to pat ourselves on the back when everything goes right. So it is about doing the difficult stuff. That's when, that's when really leaders come into their own. So I do think most firms recognise it. I think most firms put it in a difficult box. It's definitely possible to do. To Maria's point, are they putting the effort in?
Mm-hmm.
It also takes time.
Yeah.
Elapsed time. And I think that sometimes puts people off as well.
Go on.
3 years to change my culture? I haven't got 3 years. Well, no, maybe you should have started 3 years ago.
Thanks for that. You must have been a banker in a previous life.
We want to make it practical, and we want people to go away with a playbook in some shape or form. And to that end, we gleaned from this, and I thought this was not comedy gold. I don't think that you could argue that this would be hysterically laughing at this. But in terms of the security learning curve, it's not much of a curve. Yeah, I get it. It's a stepped process. That's my interpretation of Jonas Heisler's model here. But I thought that I would shamelessly look at this and rip it off and actually change it from the security learning curve to the stepped process. And this model maps, as you can see, and how an individual may move from the unaware to automatic vigilance. From an employee saying at the bottom of the first step on the ladder, effectively, an employee saying, I didn't even realize that it was risky to open that email, to, you know what, at the top of the level 9, which is, I can spot and stop threats instinctively. I think going back to your point, Adrian, where do you think most organizations actually sit on this step or curve today? 1 to 5. I'm sorry, 1 to 9. Where do you think they are?
When you say organizations don't act, people act. So
good. Yeah, okay, fair.
So you can't hide it. You're not a government. So if you were talking, if you're talking from the point of view of taking responsibilities and the exec, I think it's somewhere between 3 and 4.
Yeah. Okay. 3 and 4. Maria?
Yeah, I'd say about the same, actually. I think I've seen some client organizations sort of head up towards 5 and 6, but not that many.
And 7 is just, if 7 is ownership, you have your people owning, your people genuinely first line of defense. It's a phrase we use a lot, Maria, in the financial services space. Yeah. If your people are genuinely the first line of defense in this cyber war, you are so far down the line compared with most other firms. The chances of you actually getting hacked, for want of a better phrase, is dramatically reduced. Ownership for me is where I would be aiming for. Get everyone in the organisation genuine first line of defence, caring, knowing they can do something about it, empowered.
Maria, then the challenges for all people on this firm, we've got InfoSec officers, we've got CEOs, we've got first, second and third line in this conversation. How can leaders help people move up this curve step faster?
Well, I think leaders need to do it themselves first.
Ding dong. Ding dong. Well said, Maria.
Mic drop.
Punchy.
You can get invited back.
If they're not doing it, they might as well give up, frankly. So I think they need to do it first. And when, because we say the word role modeling, but what does that actually mean? Well, it means I'm doing what I'm saying I'm doing and what I'm asking you to do. So there's no point me asking my organization to be aware, interested, understand, and all those things if I'm not doing it myself. So they need to do it first. And then they need to start putting sort of behaviors in place where if someone is doing it, they recognize it first, they reward it, they talk about it, they bring it to light, through potentially storytelling. I had a great example yesterday, actually, someone telling me about how they do it in their organization. And this is why I sort of tempered my response a little bit, because I have seen some examples of where it is being adopted. And the consequences, if somebody fails a sort of an internal check, so there's an internally generated phishing, if they fail it, the consequence is that they have to do a hell of a lot of work through training and assessments and so on. And the cognitive effort it takes for them to do all the extra assessments is what puts them off and makes them more vigilant. I thought that was pretty good, actually. That it's not a punishment per se. It's just, okay, well, you've just got to do more work now. So in order to avoid all the extra work, I'm extra vigilant. I thought that was pretty smart.
Yeah, stick and the carrot in there. Adrian, how does Elephants Don't Forget help and support individual employees move up this curve?
It's about that first line of defense. So I think there's many component parts of that. One is they need to know what they're doing. They need to actually be competent, and most of them aren't. No offense, but they're not. That one training course that they did isn't sufficient. So they need to be competent. They need to know that they are empowered and able to act. And I think that in a lot of cases, most employees don't think they are. So they need to have the confidence to act. And I think that organisations should be measuring culture, not in a finger pointing way, but they should be measuring in their organisation's culture in relation to cybersecurity in a way that they are able to at least draw a line in the sand and say, we're here, we need to be there, and we do that. That for us is our bread and butter. The approach, interestingly, Maria mentioned it earlier. It's all about continual. It can't be dip in, dip out. It needs to be a continual thing. So I think the book's called Flywheel Effect, isn't it? Where you push against the flywheel and gradually you get it moving. Huge amount of effort at the beginning, and ultimately then the wheel just turns itself almost.
Yeah.
You've got to put the effort in. Nothing's for free.
Yeah, apparently so. Yeah. Look, I mean, we've talked about a lot and discussed a lot. We've introduced new vocabulary that you can use in your kids, like schema. Really throw them, really mess with their heads at dinner time tonight and say, what's your schema like, son?
Nothing to do with skiing, like you thought it was.
Exactly. And so there's an opportunity here on our last poll question if you want to reach out to Clever Nelly and learn how you can actually retain in-role competency, confidence and knowledge and understanding of how to respond and react to cyber security, then please indicate and tick that box there. If you want to discuss with Maria and her colleagues at Pathlight how to integrate vigilance and a robust cyber security awareness into your culture and behaviors, obviously tick that box as well. And also, if you want our range of blogs, papers, podcasts, and webinars, especially on financial crime, compliance, risk, governance, consumer duty, and all the rest from both of our organizations, then please hit that yes button on the bottom, or that yes option at the bottom of the screen. And there. Questions. Panelists, do you see any questions that we could basically answer and respond to in the next 20 seconds?
I was going to say we'll come back. There was a couple of, no offense, a couple of good questions. I was going to come back to you afterwards.
Great. Okay. Well, it's been an interesting webinar. We've had everything in this, haven't we? We've had somebody trying to hack into Adrian's account. We've had a familiarization with the fact that we were actually in cyber risk or cyber security awareness month. We've had schemas. We've had lots of other things going on in this webinar, and also an understanding that you do know how to use the emoji button, as well as actually, yes, you will get the slides.
No one asked, Philip. No one asked. I owe you a beer.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. They didn't ask, which is not a real diss on us, actually. So thank you so much, Maria. Thank you, Adrian, as well, for your comments and your feedback on that. And thank you for participating in this webinar. We always like your feedback and comments on these webinars. We didn't take ourselves too seriously, but seriously enough to land, hopefully, those mic drop moments so that you can go and petition to your board, not necessarily for more IT spend, but actually more improvement and more awareness in terms of like improving the competence and confidence of your people to address what is a real and present threat to all firms, regardless of where you are there. Thank you very much indeed, and have a great afternoon. Take care.
Philip, I've got to say, you sound so professional.
Do I?
Yeah,
okay.
I've got to say, it's a pleasure talking to you.
My wife is walking backwards and forwards, laughing at me, going, why don't you sound like that any other time?
It's a pleasure.
Take care, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.